The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not reflect the official stance of their employer or any affiliated organizations. Welcome back to the Counsel House Podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Abramoff, and today's guest is Natalie Carter, Associate General Counsel, Litigation at Duke Energy. Today, we're talking about something very important to legal professionals, and that is mental fitness. Being able to take care of yourself physically and mentally while doing everything you can to support your clients. Natalie has some amazing tips and tricks on how to do so, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
I know mental fitness is something you're incredibly passionate about, and it's a topic that has become central to your work as a coach and a leader. To give our listeners some context, could you share a bit about your personal journey and what led you to realize just how important mental fitness is?
Absolutely. So let me take you back to October 9th, 2016. My husband and I, we were expecting our second child, a little boy. We had a little boy. And it was actually 9:00 on the dot. And former President Trump and Hillary Clinton were about to start their debate. 9:00 on the dot, and I went into labor. I was expecting to have a scheduled cesarean section in 9 days. So the fact that I went into labor didn't panic me. So my husband and I, we got ready to go to the hospital. We had my sister come over to take care of our son, who was 3 at the time, headed out to the hospital and thought, we're having a baby. And I actually remember thinking, by the time we have the baby, it'll be October 10th, and 10/10, what an awesome birthday. So we headed to the hospital and took us back to the triage room. And that's where they kind of confirmed that you are in fact in labor. And they did. Yep, you are in labor. So we're excited. We're like, great, we're having a baby. And then they go to look for the heartbeat. That's just kind of standard procedure. And any of your listeners who have born a child and gone through the process, you know, they have that little Doppler and they kind of put it over your stomach with the gel and look for the heartbeat. And they couldn't find it. I remember my husband he said something in alarm. I don't remember what he said, but he was alarmed. This being my second child, having gone to countless appointments like this, I know that sometimes the baby is hiding and being a little bit tricky. So I remember saying, don't panic. And the nurse said, I'm going to go get the big ultrasound machine. And she went to the doorway and another nurse joined her. And I remember the nurse who had first spoken to me, her back was to me. And I saw it in her body language. And that's when I realized for the first time that something was wrong. Her body language told me. I didn't hear what she said to the other nurse, but her body language kind of set off some red flags for me. So they came back with the big ultrasound machine, and they came back with the doctor on call. And they put the gel on and they go through that whole thing. And now with the ultrasound machine, you can see the baby on the machine. And the doctor said, no movement. And that is how he told my husband and I that our second child had died in utero. He just said the words, no movement. And I could actually see our son just floating there lifeless on the screen. So needless to say, I start screaming. I don't really remember much about what else I said, but I'm screaming because we thought we were there to have a baby and we are finding out that our baby has died. So again, lots going on at this point, but I don't remember all the specifics. But essentially, they said, okay, well, now you have to deliver. And I started out the story by saying that I thought I was having a scheduled C-section in 9 days. So I assumed when they told me that our son had died, that I was going to have a C-section. And they said, no, sorry, because the baby died in utero, you have to labor. And I was like, wait, say what? So long and short, I labored for 17 hours, Daniel, and then still had to end up having a C-section to deliver our son, Ethan Alexander Carter. So he was born on October 10th at 8 pounds, 2 ounces, but he was born still. So here I am, having thought I was having a healthy pregnancy, expecting to deliver a healthy baby. And I am now on October 10th, 2016, going home empty-handed. Nothing prepares you for that. I can't even now articulate what do you do with that? I don't even remember how I even grasped that concept, how I wrapped my brain around it. But that's what started my journey. I didn't know how to put my life back together after that. I remember saying to my sister shortly after we lost Ethan, I'll never smile again. And what I meant by that, I had my husband who was super supportive. I had my 3-year-old who was my world and just the funniest and cutest kid who I adored. But when I said I'd never smile again, I knew I didn't mean like never crack a smile. I meant have real joy again. I thought I was broken beyond repair. So that really was the start of my mental fitness journey, although I didn't know it at the time, right? I didn't call it that. I didn't know it that. I was just broken. Let me not give your audience the impression that I lost my son and said, you know what, I'm going to start a mental fitness journey. I was shattered, absolutely shattered. So that's kind of what the impetus was for starting it. But then it became, how do I put my life back together?
What were some of the specific practices or strategies that helped you during those times to be able to build that resilience?
So like I said, I felt shattered. And I don't know when it was, but shortly after losing Ethan, where again, it's just this abyss of darkness where you don't know how you're going to come out of it. I do remember having the conscious thought, you know what? I don't want my 3-year-old in 20 or 30 years to turn to me and say, you know what, Mom, I was never enough for you. You never were able to get over the fact that we lost Ethan. And I was here and you weren't here for me. I had that conscious thought. And so I set about healing initially for him, for my son, to say, you know what, so that he doesn't grow up with this feeling of not enoughness, which I know would have caused him grief and trauma through his life. So I said, okay, I want to heal myself. But how do I go about that? And so I set off on that course. You know, I like to call it grief work, right? And there's a reason they call it work and not grief relaxation. It's a lot of work to put your life back together. You know, who you see sitting in front of you today, you know, Beyonce has a song that says, I woke up like this. I did not wake up like this. I put in a lot of work to get to the point where I now have the life that I've created and built. And so I said, okay, how am I going to do this? I've never had to do this. And by the way, I didn't know anyone else who'd had to do this. You know, if you think about some grief and loss, we all eventually lose our parents. Doesn't mean it's less difficult, but everybody eventually loses a parent. So you can reach out to someone who's lost a dad and say, how did you get through it? And what did you do? And have someone you can commune with. You can reach out to someone who's lost a mom and the same thing. There are very few people who've lost a baby, very few people who've lost a child. And I definitely differentiate between losing an older child and a stillbirth that happened to me and losing a baby. And so it's a lonely journey. It's also very different, just for your audience's sake, than miscarriage, right? Miscarriage is defined as losing a baby less than 20 weeks gestation. I was 9 months pregnant when we lost Ethan. It was a full 8-pound, 2-ounce baby that we lost. So it's a lonely journey. That's my point. It's lonely. So one of the first things I did, and it's a tip I would give anybody who's going through trauma, grief, find community. You know, I think there are mental fitness hacks, and I kind of will talk about some of them. Isolation is not a mental fitness hack. Isolation is what you intuitively want to do, but it's the worst thing for you to be alone, and you feel alone. That's how you feel. So you think about even going back to law school. I was a first-generation lawyer myself. And so for those who are first-generation lawyers, you don't know what law school is going to be like. And I remember, you know, going in there, I'm feeling okay. I'm fairly intelligent. And I remember being like, whoa, this is a lot. They want me to read all these cases. I don't even understand what they mean. I remember reading cases over and over, and you feel alone, like you're the only law student who's struggling. And I remember we ended up finding a group of people, group of law students, all 1Ls. And we got together and we started talking, and we realized, oh, you feel the same way I do. So I'm not alone. So you're still struggling to get the holding of that case too? Oh, and that immediately gives you a sense of empowerment. Well, I give you that example because it's no different with processing grief, processing trauma, when you realize you're not alone, when there's a community. So that's what I did. I found a community through Kindermorn, which happens to be a fantastic organization in Charlotte that deals with people who have lost a child, helps counsel them. And they had a group of what we called empty arm parents, who are parents who had lost a stillbirth, had a stillbirth, lost an infant, maybe through SIDS, and got together and we got to talk without judgment, without someone telling us it's going to be okay, the baby's in a better place, all things happen for a reason, which, by the way, are tips that people who are grieving don't want to hear. And so we got together as a community and we got to talk about our feelings. So that's one of the first things that I did that helped me on my journey to healing. It was find community, find people who get what you're going through. And so I would say that to the audience, whatever it is you're going through, if you can link up with someone else who really gets it, because my family was really supportive, my friends were really supportive, but not one of them had gone through what I'd gone through. So that's a key piece in kind of building that resilience. And that was one of the first things I did.
I think that is probably the best advice that someone could give someone going through such a hard time, especially what you had mentioned, where you're not going to find immediate community as much as you would other types of traumas. And it is amazing that you were able to find that organization, which is locally. And I would think also, even if you can't find someone immediately, you should still go and seek out support, because being alone, I agree with you, it is such a detrimental thing. While it feels so much easier and so much harder to get out there and expose how you feel and what you've been through, you never know what's waiting for you. And that kind of leads actually to my follow-up. Within that time period, how do you feel that those sudden changes affected your career and your growth as a professional?
The legal profession, everyone knows, it's a demanding profession. It is stressful on your best day, right? When all cylinders are firing and you are feeling sharp and on your A game, it is a stressful, high demanding career. Well, now add trauma to it. And I will tell you, I find it a blessing, so to speak, that I actually lost a child through birth. I got 4 months because I got maternity leave, right? People lose children. If people lose a 7-year-old, I mean, most companies' bereavement policies are a few days and they expect you to go back to work. I mean, think about it, right? You get a few days for bereavement. The only reason I was off of work for 4 months is I had given birth. And that 4 months that I took allowed me to try to even begin to imagine to go back to a career where the demands say, you got to be on it. You got to be sharp. There is not a lot of room for pain and grief and trauma. So I don't want to sugarcoat it and say that it was easy to go back to work, because it wasn't. I remember having trouble concentrating. I remember, again, you're still processing this like intense loss. Some people I know going to work distracts them, maybe from what's going on. And for some people that may have been the case. That wasn't the case for me, where I felt like, all right, I'm at work for 8, 9, 10 hours and it's a respite from the pain and the grief. I honestly, Daniel, in that first year, don't remember much about what I did on a day-to-day basis. It created this kind of fog, this lapse in my memory. And so that's a real thing. That's a real effect. That, forget about just my story, but anybody processing trauma who is a lawyer or a legal professional, are you really able to operate at 100% when you've got such a heavy weight that you're bearing and trying to cope with? So it absolutely affected my ability to be kind of fully present and at my best. Would I say that year after I lost my son was my best year of legal practice? Of course not. Absolutely not. I did my best. I tried my best to make it through it, but we are human. And what we're going through personally affects how we work professionally, how we show up in the workplace. Has a lot to do with what we are going through internally in our personal lives.
You mentioned that developing your own mental fitness was a crucial turning point for you. Can you explain the difference to our audience between mental fitness and mental health?
Absolutely. So I want to be really clear here. I am not a mental health professional. I am not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not licensed to do any of those mental health services. People who have anxiety, depression, mental illness, they should seek a mental health professional for whatever they're going through. And even as did I when I went through grief, right? When I processed my grief, part of my journey, part of actually the tool in my mental fitness toolbox, one of my tools was getting counseling. I got individual counseling. I did the group counseling, which I talked about already. And then even my husband and I did a little couples counseling. So counseling, speaking to a licensed professional, is to me part of the mental fitness toolbox. You need that. It's one piece of it that you need to do. So the difference to me is, as a mental fitness coach, what I help people do is cultivate their mental flexibility, their mental strength, their mental endurance, their mental stamina, and their mental resilience, right? And so I call myself kind of a personal trainer for the mind. So when we think of physical fitness and getting a personal trainer, what does a personal trainer work with you on? Your flexibility, your mobility, your strength, your stamina, right? You do cardio to build your strength and your stamina. You do weights to build your strength. You do stretching to build your flexibility. All of those pieces are part of being physically strong and whole. So if you only work on weights, you only weight train as part of your fitness regime, what you will find as you continue to age is that the fact that you have no flexibility and mobility is really going to affect your mobility. The same way if you just do cardio. So you run and run and run, but you never strength train. As you continue to age, doctors will tell you, you've got to start putting in strength training because of your bones and your muscles. And again, flexibility. Are you doing mobility work? Why? Because you need all of that to be physically fit and sound. One piece alone doesn't cut it. Mental fitness is the same exact way. So you have to think about mental fitness as all of those pieces. You need to make sure that you're resilient, that you can bounce back when life hits you hard, because life hits everybody hard. It's just about when it's your turn, right? I say the pendulum always swings. When you're going through really rough times, have hope because the pendulum swings. And when you're riding the wave and you're feeling good, enjoy it because the pendulum swings, because we all go through challenges, right? So I look at mental fitness as that same thing. You got to build that resilience. You got to build the stamina. You got to keep going. You don't know when things are going to get better. That's the trick, right? You're going along. And if someone could tell you, listen, Daniel, by October 15th, all your problems, you're good. It would help you to say, okay, I can keep going. But nobody gets those assurances. So what is part of mental fitness? Stamina. To keep going no matter how long it takes for the pendulum to swing, for things to get better. So you think about the legal career, our legal careers, full of pressure, high demands, for a lot of people, high billable hours. When the pressure hits, that ability to be flexible, to be able to withstand it. It's like that tree in the wind. We've all heard of that analogy, right? It's a windstorm, and you've got the tree that's able to do this and is able to bend and be flexible. That tree survives the storm. The tree that is rigid snaps, breaks when the winds come, when the pressure comes. And the thing about mental fitness is you got to be cultivating that before the storm hits. You can't wait for the storm to hit to say, okay, now I'm going to be working my stamina, my flexibility. No, you've got to have been cultivating that all along, so that when the storm hits, those habits that you've been building, that you've been cultivating, that you've been creating, they kick in. But that's all the pre-work. You got to do the pre-work so that when the stuff hits, when the hard times come, you're prepared and you can handle it.
That's why having a mental health coach, I think, is so valuable, to be able to point out how many different types of problems that are sort of going on, but also to validate you as an individual, to be able to say, look, you got through these little wins to prepare for the huge storm, right? And it's going through those moments where you're almost knocked over and you pick yourself back up so that when the real storm comes, you're ready to go. And you did an excellent job explaining what mental fitness is and why it's so important. But I'd love to dive deeper into the consequences of not prioritizing it, and especially in the legal profession where the pressure is so high. From your experience, how does neglecting mental fitness affect a lawyer's performance?
So one of the things that I love is that recently we've started to see a little less stigma attached to mental health. Even, mental fitness versus mental health. I use the term mental fitness, and I feel like there's a little less automatic stigma attached to it. We still are getting through the stigmas attached to mental health, mental illness. You'll hear people say, nobody says, oh, you have a physical illness. Like nobody attaches a stigma per se to a cancer or any other kind of physical illness. But if someone is to come forward and say they have a mental illness, I think a lot of times employers can look at that and say, we question someone's ability to perform on the job in a way that we don't always attach to a physical illness. And so I think that's changing, which is a great thing. You see a lot of kind of talk about it on social media and just in the news, and especially with celebrities who have been open about their mental health challenges or unfortunately have committed suicide because of their mental issues. So you start to see people talking about it more. And I think that is so key because it's key for every profession, but in the legal profession where the stress is high, right? I'm not going to claim to know the stats, but I know lawyers have a higher percentage of alcoholism than some other professions. We've talked about that for years, right? We even do kind of substance abuse and mental health CLEs to kind of address the fact that our profession has a high rate of suffering through some of these issues. And so how it impacts our performance is kind of talked about it in the beginning already. How clear-headed can you be if you are suffering through trauma, through depression, through anxiety, through whatever is going on in your life? And we have ethical obligations to our clients. We don't have ethical obligations to be perfect. I mean, I think a lot of lawyers suffer from perfectionism, which is not actually something to be touted as a badge of honor. But we do have an ethical obligation to do our best. And can you really give your best if you mentally are not at your best? If you're not mentally fit, can you really give your best as a lawyer and advocate for your clients the way you need to? I would say you can't. And so that's why it's so important to take care of yourself, to take care of your physical fitness, which we talk a lot about, right? We talk about you got to get the right nutrition, you got to exercise. I'm a huge proponent of exercise, of getting moving. That's part of, to me, one of the tools in the toolbox of mental fitness. But we talk about that. We're like, get out, get some fresh air, walk, get some exercise. But people don't usually say things like, go see a therapist, make sure you're meditating. They don't say that as much when we talk about lawyers and how to keep them mentally sound and mentally fit. You hear a lot more about make sure you're getting some fresh air, get some rest, eat right, and go take a walk. But are people saying things like have moments of stillness, work on your breath work? Are you journaling? Are you seeing a therapist? We don't hear that as much. But all of that stuff is important for making sure that we can give our clients a clear head, a sharp mind, right? Lawyers got to be able to think on their feet. We got to be reasonable, clear-headed, have good judgment, all of those skills that we need to be the best advocates we can for our client. We have to cultivate them with a mentally fit mind first. That's the only way that we can have them.
Absolutely. And it's obviously very clear how important all these things are. And I think a lot of our listeners really do appreciate all these different tips that you just gave, because those are all huge ways to be able to free up your mind and while still tackling the stressful work, but to be able to preserve your health. So as we wrap up this insightful conversation, Natalie, I want to thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey and offering such practical, actionable advice on building mental fitness. Your perspective on resilience, especially in the high-pressure legal industry, is not only incredibly inspiring, but very relevant. And for all our listeners, I hope today's episode has sparked new ways of thinking about mental fitness and how to integrate it into your daily routines, whether it's through small practices or bigger lifestyle changes. Remember, just like physical fitness, mental fitness requires ongoing attention and care, and it's essential for both personal well-being and professional success. If you're interested in learning more from Natalie or exploring her work in mental fitness coaching, we'll have links and resources in the show notes. Thank you again, Natalie, for joining us today. And to our listeners, stay tuned for more conversations at the intersection of legal excellence, personal growth, and resilience here on the Counsel House Podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself, both mentally and physically.